If I could just ask all of you to please turn off your videos and also turn your sound off, i.e. mute yourselves. We ask that very respectfully. It just allows us to concentrate the focus on our guest speaker for this evening. So welcome back to those of you who have been joining us already for these webinars, and welcome to anyone who might be new to these. We're delighted once again to see so many of you with us. And on behalf of the World Zionist Organization in the United Kingdom and the Zionist Federation, we are very appreciative that you support us in this way. Yeah, ladies and gents, sorry to push the point, but if we could just ask you to turn off your videos and to mute your microphones. And that will just help us keep the focus on our guest speaker for everyone in the webinar. Thank you. So tonight we have a very engaging and very topical subject for tonight's webinar. I think in early February it will be the 72nd anniversary of the Knesset, of Israel's seat of democracy. And tonight we're joined by the director of the Knesset Museum, Moshe Fuksman Shal. And Moshe will talk us through the history of the Knesset. It has a very rich and varied history. I think I'm correct, and no doubt Moshe will correct me when he starts to speak if I'm not, but I think the museum now sits in the original site, in a building in Jerusalem, which was the original site of the Knesset. And obviously over the years, it's changed locations on a number of occasions. And I think from 1949, it was about 16 or 17 years before the Knesset finally was relocated to where it is now in Jerusalem. I think you'll all agree with me that it's, for those of you who have seen it in the flesh, so to speak, it's a beautiful building. As a former architect, I very much appreciate the architecture of that building. For me, it's very pleasing on the eye, but you know, that's just the nerd part of me that appreciates the building. It's in a beautiful setting, and some of you may know that there have been contributions from the British Jewish community to certain aspects of the Knesset and its immediate surroundings. So I think, you know, without further ado, as I've said, if you could all just make sure that your mics are turned off and your videos are turned off, and I shall hand you over to tonight's guest speaker, Moshe Fuksman Shal. Okay, over to you, Moshe. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Stephen. I hope everybody are hearing me, and I'm very happy to speak to you from Modi'in in Israel, where I live. And you know, I understand the last event was in Hanukkah, and I always say that Modi'in is the city of Hanukkah because it's all started there. Matityahu and the Maccabi and the miracle and the menorah that we'll speak about and so on. Two remarks before I start with my presentation. First remark is that building, I know what I will start sharing. I will start doing the share screen, and this it is. Let's see, I hope it will work. I hope everybody are seeing it. So the first remark is that the building or the museum is now under, we are building it, so nobody can see it right now, the museum is under construction, and like Steve said, it is in the middle of Jerusalem, where the Knesset used to be. And the second remark is that we are celebrating actually tomorrow evening, Tu B'Shvat, and Tu B'Shvat, as you probably know, in the Jewish tradition, is the New Year's of the trees. The 15th of Shvat is the New Year of the trees. And it's also, tomorrow is we are celebrating Tu B'Shvat because it was Tu B'Shvat 1949. Yes, it was February, but then it was also the Hebrew date was Tu B'Shvat, and we are celebrating the anniversary of the Knesset every year on Tu B'Shvat. So actually tomorrow we are celebrating, and although because of the coronavirus and all the situation, we are going to do only Zoom events and so on. We have election again, the fourth time already. So most events will be like our event, by Zoom, by virtual, in the virtual space and not in the actual space like we usually do. We usually do a lot of activities at Tu B'Shvat and so on. So let's start with the presentation. So actually it's 72 years. And I made this small timeline to see where we are, that everybody will understand where we are standing and what are we speaking on. So we have the first thing, we have the United Nations partition plan for Palestine of 29th of November 1947. This plan was actually, it's called the Resolution 181. And this resolution actually ended the British mandatory government over Palestine, Eretz Israel. And as you can see, the famous pictures, I think it's in Queens there before they moved to Manhattan, before the UN moved to Manhattan, and you can see all the delegations and so on. And almost, I would say, half a year later, we have the declaration of the independence. It took half a year for the British mandatory government to withdraw from Palestine. They were here. They had a lot of military people here, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of things they had to withdraw back to Britain. And so half a year later, Ben-Gurion declares the independence, the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if anybody knows, but it was in Tel Aviv. It was in the Rothschild Boulevard, and I say about the street, the name of the street, Rothschild Boulevard, because we will engage with this name again. And as you can see, after 9 months later, the Knesset was inaugurated, the inauguration of the Knesset, 14th of February, like Steve said, 49, and this was Tu B'Shvat, 49, and as I said, this is why we celebrate on Tu B'Shvat. So this is the timeline that we are dealing with, and we are speaking about what happened. And as you can see, it took 9 months from the Declaration of Independence by Ben-Gurion until the Knesset has opened in the beginning in Jerusalem and then left to Tel Aviv. 9 months of what I called a democratic pregnancy. 9 months of a high-risk pregnancy because we were in war, in the War of Independence, and it was very hard to make an election. Only just to make the book that the book of the registers voters, the voters book that you need in order to have an election, there was a curfew that was held in Israel from 5 o'clock to midnight, and the people from the government went house to house and registered the people who are here in order they will have a voters registration book in order to have an election. So think how it was while we were in a war, an independence war, a survival war against five armies of the Arab countries around us, and yet there wasn't. They insist on having those elections, and we had the Knesset opening on Tu B'Shvat 49. Concerning, so what we said, the partition plan. So as you can see here, in the partition plan, that was actually like a book. Everybody thinks that the partition plan of the United Nations was a Jewish state, an Arab state, Jerusalem is an international city, and that's it. But actually it was like a very thick book full of orders and full of maps and details and so on. And this partition plan, it says that the Provisional Council of Government of each state, the Arab and the Jewish state, shall no later than 2 months after the withdrawal of the armed forces of the mandatory power will hold election to constitute an assembly which shall be conducted on a democratic lines. The Constituent Assembly of each state shall draft a democratic constitution for its state and choose a provisional government to succeed the provisional council of the government appointed by the Commission. And if we are continuing in the Declaration of Independence also, we can see that Ben-Gurion reading, so he read, "We declare that with the effect from the months of the termination of the mandate being tonight, the eve of Shabbat, 6th of Iyar, until the establishment of the elected regular authorities of the state in accordance with the Constitution, which shall be adopted by the elected Constitutional Assembly, not late than the 1st of October 1948. The People Council shall act as the provincial council of state and its executive organ, and the people administration shall be the provisional government of the Jewish state to be called Israel." And of course, there was all those people were very happy and clapping their hands and so on. And this very important means, so you can see already, both in the UN resolution and both in the Declaration of Independence, there was a commitment to have a democratic state with a constitution. This didn't happen, but we'll perhaps speak about it later. And we arrived to this moment, and I have a very short movie, and with also a small tweet, Yoram Gaon, that you heard recently, in the background of 3 minutes of the historical, one of the most historical and important moments in the history of Israel.
רגלינו בשערייך ירושלים ותותחינו מרעימים לך שיר מזמור ורק דמעות הגאווה שבעיניים נוטפות דומם על המדים והחגות ציון הלא תשאלי לשלום בחורייך ציון זה האושר שואג וחזנו פראי למנצח מזמור למנצח על מקלע ורימון בשערייך בדמנו חיים בדמנו חיים ג'רח עד נבי סמואל ליליל היו רוחות תשח שרות לך בדרכן אם אשכחך אם אשכחך ירושלים אך לא שכחנו והרי אנחנו כאן ציון הלא תשאלי לשלום בחורייך ציון זה האושר שואג בחזנו פראי למנצח מזמור למנצח על מקלע ורימון בשערייך בדמנו חיים בדמנו חיים ישבת בדד השסועה בין גדרות התאים ואיך נשבענו לך עיר מלך ונביא כי לא נשק נערותינו על שפתיים עד אם נשק לכותל המערבי ציון הלא תשאלי לשלום בחורייך ציון זה האושר שואג בחזנו פראי למנצח מזמור למנצח על מקלע ורימון בשערייך בדמנו חיים בדמנו חיים.
So as we just saw this beautiful movie that we just recently found it in the State Archive and we edited it especially for you. And as you can see from the main picture, the main hero of the movie was Chaim Weizmann. I would say perhaps one of yours. Teaches in Manchester University, was a professor of chemistry, the first president of the State of Israel. And we can see him and his wife Vera entering the Knesset and being sworn in. And this is one of the beautiful pictures of him, and you can see him, and you see Yosef Sprintzak, the first speaker of the House. Look at him. And what is, for me, very interesting in this picture, that we can see not just only two leaders, Yosef Sprintzak, the first speaker of the Knesset, and Chaim Weizmann, the first president, but they are also both two bereaved fathers. And the story of fathers and sons here are very interesting, as you will see, as long as I will continue with the presentation. And you can see Chaim Weizmann lost his son, Michael. He was a pilot, and he lost him in the fight against the Nazi Germany. His plane fall down in the war. And we have Yosef Sprintzak, the first speaker, which his young son, Aaron, also was a pilot. And his plane was shot down by the Egyptian warship that was headed to Tel Aviv, to bomb Tel Aviv during the Independence War, just a few months before he is taking the role of opening the Knesset in Jerusalem. And so those are two actually fathers, and not only just two leaders. And I think that it shows you the price that the Jewish people had to pay in order to arrive to such happy times, or to such important time of having a state and having its own parliament. So when we saw this movie, and we saw the emotions, and it was really a very emotional moment in the life of Israel. All of Jerusalem, if you saw, went out to see for the first time after 2,000 years a parliament, a Jewish parliament convenes in the internal capital in Jerusalem. And, the elderly people came and started praying, Shechianu and Kiimanu. And the young people and the young boys had their flags, and it was so cold that one hand they had the flag, and in the other hand they put in the pocket, and then they switched all the time. And it was really one of the most important moments in the life of our nation. And I think that we shouldn't take it also for granted, because I have here some pictures of why reason, Israel was established as a democratic state. And it is only about, there are 5 or 6 countries from about 200 countries in the world that was established as a democratic country from the beginning. And, it had all the reason why not to be a democratic country. If you see on my left, you can see the tents, and you can see that Israel had to absorb more people than its inhabitants. So we had to absorb about almost 1 million refugees, Jewish refugees from all over the world, coming with nothing, and you have to supply them with food, with housing, with work as a young country, and it was a very tough period. If you can see down there pictures of immigrants that's coming from Morocco, but most of the people that also lived in Israel in that time, in 49, came from countries with no democratic tradition. They came either from Eastern Europe, that saw what happened. They had probably a short, brief time of democracy, and then they went into tyranny, or in West Europe with Nazi Germany, and what happened with Mussolini and Franco and so on. And of course, Jews from Arab countries that also came from countries that don't have a democratic tradition. And we were in the middle of a war, as you can see, from all sides, 5 armies attacking the young country. And on the above, you can see the ship Altalena, who was a ship that brought by the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, the underground. And if you think about it, we had 3 armed undergrounds with different political aspiration, with different ideology. And it is also in other countries, you can see in Greece or other places when they have armed undergrounds. It's not easy to lay down your arms when you have it and say, no, we are going only with democratic methods, only with democracy. And also the shortage. You can see the lines for food in Tel Aviv, the shortage of food in that area. So how come that we chose democracy? How come in Tu B'Shvat 49 we chose to open our parliament and not, we had all the reason why not, and to delay it by a decade or so, and also living in an area where you don't have any democratic country around you. So as I usually say, first of all, you know, the Jewish tradition has in Exodus 23, after the majority to rest, that means that there was a democratic tradition already in Judaism. If you look in the diaspora, in the Jews from Poland, in the Council of Four Lands in Poland, already 500 years ago, coming together, representative of different communities in Poland, like a parliament, deciding on things. The American Jewish Congress, after the First World War, having election of about 300,000 Jews participating and electing their representative. Of course, the Zionist movement, if you can see below the picture of the Zionist Congress, so the Zionist movement started also as a national democratic movement. From the beginning, a democratic Congress with people are being elected in their countries and giving women the right to vote and to be voted to the Congress from the second Zionist Congress. And of course, the time of the British mandate over Eretz Israel, and we can see the Assembly of Representatives that we had. So also in that period, we had a tradition of parties, of voting, and so on. So this is why I think that eventually Israel was among 5 or 6 countries in the world that was established as a democratic state from the beginning. So we're going to speak now a little bit about the importance of the Jewish community. And for the first thing, you know, when Shprintzak, you can see him on the right, decided to open a parliament, and you know, we didn't have any tradition, any experience with having a parliament. With we know we had the tradition with the Jewish Congress, with the Zionist Congress, and so on, and the Representative Assembly, and so on. But it wasn't like a parliament that are sitting every day with committees, that is the government, that has the budget, and so on. And Shprintzak didn't know what to do. And he started asking people, who can help me with this knowledge? Who can help us do that? And everybody spoke about one name. And the one name that everybody told him you have to approach everywhere he asked, Rossetti, or Maurice Rossetti. And he came, he was a Jew from Britain, from actually, he was born in London in the beginning of the 20th century with a family of 10 brothers and sisters from East London. His father was a rabbi in a small synagogue in East London. And he got a traditional, of course, education. And later, he was in the University of London, where he did his degree in economics and law. And he tried to, and he was a part of the Labour Party in those times, and even tried to run through Parliament. And after he failed, he actually was the head of the Zionist lobby in the British Parliament. And Moshe Rossetti used to say that he used to come to Parliament every, I think every week, a few times. And the guards started thinking that he was actually part of the Parliament. And one time there was a new guard, and he stopped him and said, who are you? So one of the other guards said, what do you do? He's an MP. So everybody thought that he was a member of the British Parliament from the time that he was so much there, being the head of the Zionist lobby in the British Parliament. And Shprintzak approached him And I think that also it's very interesting because he was very disappointed in the time from the Labor, because Labor, the Labor government that was in power at that time was considered to be a friend of the Jewish or the Mapai, the party of Ben Gurion, was like the Israeli Labor. And they thought that when they will be in power and they will replace the Tory government, that we will see a different approach. But instead of that, we had the foreign minister named Bevin, who said all kinds of remarks that if the British Jewry will continue to be Zionists, there will be a rise of anti-Semitism against them. And also he said that the Americans don't want to support Zionism because they prefer to see Jews in Palestine and not in New York. So he was very, I would say, even with anti-Semitic character, and Rossetti was very disappointed. And when Shpentzak approached him and said, please come and make Aliyah, he took all his family from London and he arrived to Jerusalem. And then he really headed, he was the Secretary General of the Knesset for the 2 decades of the beginning of the establishment of the Knesset. And he was not only the Secretary General, but he was also the Director General. And he actually, when I look at the archives, I can see how important was his contribution to the parliament. He decided all matters of how much time should be every debate, and how do you ask the question, and how do you do the committees, and who is in charge of every committee, and so on. And eventually he was even the president of the organization of all the secretary generals of the parliaments all over the world. So he was very important. And I think that it was a very big contribution to the Knesset and shaping the Knesset, Moshe Rossetti. And the Knesset, as I said, after 3 days in Jerusalem, they left to Tel Aviv because we have to remember that I would say that in the beginning, at least in the early days of the state, Israel didn't have the capital, because when the Ben Gurion and the leadership of the Jewish community decided that they accept the UN resolution of the partition, so they had a very important decision to make. And the decision was that we agree to have the state, but the price of this, of getting our independent state was actually, the price was that we cannot have Jerusalem. And this UN partition decision said that Jerusalem is an international city. And this was a very, I would say, tough, and I think a very tragic decision that Ben Gurion had to do. And he did it because he said, we know what on the scales, and we have to take the state even if we don't have Jerusalem. And when the Knesset opened for the first 3 days in Jerusalem and then left to Tel Aviv, the British here, the British delegate here, the British ambassador, said that he cannot come to the opening of the Knesset because Jerusalem is not part of the Jewish state. So you have to understand and also the American ambassador and also the French ambassador. And the Knesset had to move to Tel Aviv. Chaim Weizmann, the president, was in Rehovot, accepting there the ambassador, the foreign ambassador. And the government also sat in Tel Aviv, near what we know today is the Sarona market, whereas today the Ministry of Defense. And until actually December 49, Israel was a country without a capital. And most of its, although it sounds very strange, but most of its bureaucracy and the government and so on sat in Tel Aviv. We can see here the Kesem movie house where the Knesset used to sit, and we have the San Remo Hotel where all the bureaucracy of the Knesset used to sit, and so on. And only until December 49. And what happened in December 49? In December 49, we have election in Australia. So how come election in Australia in December 49 changes the whole situation? What happened is that in December 49, there is election in Australia, and the prime minister there wants to be re-elected, and he needs the vote, and he's a Protestant, and he needs the vote of the Catholic voters in Australia. And he's been approached by the Pope that really wanted that Jerusalem would be international and not, and the holy places won't be either in the hands of King Hussein or King Abdullah from Jordan, and neither by the hands of the Jewish government heading by Ben-Gurion. So he came to the UN and with a resolution saying that Jerusalem should be an international city like it was determined in the partition plan, and the UN will send a big military force to actually make it so. And Ben-Gurion understand that the way that he handled the thing so far, that Jerusalem was a city, that there was a police, there was Israeli police and there was Jerusalem police. We had the Israeli mail and there was the mail of Jerusalem. And he thought that by not doing anything, time will do itself, and eventually Jerusalem will become our capital de facto, if not de jure. And he thought that this will be the way. But when it happened in the UN and this resolution passed with a big majority that Israel should withdraw from West Jerusalem and that there should be an international force that will arrive to Eretz Israel, Ben-Gurion come to the Knesset and he said to the members of Knesset, if we have to decide to leave the UN or to leave Jerusalem, we prefer to leave the UN. And from next week, we are all going back to Jerusalem. And in December, actually, it was Hanukkah. It was Hanukkah of 49, that the Knesset, the government, and everybody, or in 3 weeks, all the bureaucracy of the government went from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It wasn't easy. Jerusalem wasn't such a big city like it is today. It was a very poor city. It was a lot of years under siege from the Jordanian, and a very poor city with a lot of places to be. So they had to build housing for all of the bureaucracy that is coming back to Jerusalem. And the member of Knesset, it wasn't easy to come from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem like it is today. But this was the decision in December of 49, and the Knesset returns to, as you can see here, the Knesset returns to Jerusalem, and it's looked for a building to stay in. So in the beginning, they returned to what we call the National Institutes, where they opened the Knesset, and afterward to the Foreman House, where you can see it on the left. It was under construction, and they decided to take it because it was easy to change the building in order to facilitate our parliament. And we are building there. The museum of the parliament and of what happened there. So the parliament is in Jerusalem, and everything is continuing like it's usually and so on. But one day, coming to the speaker, to Shprintzak, and they are telling him, look, there is here the second Viscount Samuel, the Viscount of Mount Carmel, Edwin Samuel, who wants to have a meeting with you. And of course, Shprintzak say, sure, why not? And a little bit about Edwin. So Edwin Samuel is the son of Herbert Samuel. Herbert Samuel, you may know him as the first Jewish minister in Her Majesty government. He was the Minister of Interior Affairs. He introduced to Parliament the law for that women can vote in the British election. And he was the most high-ranking Jew in those times in the government. And later, he became the first High Commissioner of Palestine in Transjordan, the first High Commissioner after the British took over mandatory Palestine from the Turks. And Edwin Samuel was his son, and he was also a very interesting guy. As you can see here, his picture. He was educated at Oxford and at Westminster School, and he was in the Royal Artillery in the First World War, and he entered with Allenby to Jerusalem with the forces of Britain that took over Jerusalem from the Turks. And you can see a picture of his wedding. He married Hadassah Gur, who was one of the most beautiful girls in the time of the Yishuv, of time of the Jewish settlement here in mandatory Palestine. She was known all over Eretz Israel as the most beautiful girl, like a Jewish princess. She went to Switzerland to learn psychology, and she used to play. She used to play the piano. They say that everybody who heard her play just was enchanted by her. And Edwin rented a room in her parents' house. Her parents also was very important. Her father was the most famous educator in the time of the Shuv. He wrote one of the first dictionary of Hebrew. He was a Hebrew searcher and so on. And you can see here their wedding. There came almost 800 people from all over the Middle East, from all over, from Jordan, from Israel, the land of Israel. And you can see him dressed like a Bedouin sheik, because they came, all the leaders of the Bedouin tribes from the south, and they wear him, they put clothes like a Bedouin sheik, and they declared him the sheik of Beersheba. And it was one of the most amazing wedding ever. It was in the Augusta Victoria compound in Mount Olives. And this was Edwin Samuel, and he wanted a meeting with Yosef Shprintzak. And Yosef Shprintzak said, of course, if he wants a meeting, let's meet with him. And he came with this idea, from exile to homeland. Let's bring, he said, the temple menorah that portrayed in a narrative relief on the inner side of the arch of Titus Gate in Rome. As you can see it on the left. And this menorah is a symbolic, very symbolic, I would say, had a very symbolic effect in Israel until our days. As you can see, I put on the right a picture that I got on Twitter and also on WhatsApp after what happened in the American Congress, that someone tried to steal their podium. So you see somebody put it on the relief of taking the menorah from Eretz Israel to Rome, which was the story that ended the Jewish independence in those times. In the middle, you have also a picture of the Jewish community in Rome after the Declaration of Independence by Ben Gurion. It was on Friday, and then this Friday they went, mostly a lot of the people from the Jewish community in Rome, and stood under this Titus Gate, under the arch, and under to see the menorah, and rejoiced that actually 2,000 years from the destruction of our independence, we have a new independence right now. So we can understand the symbolic part of the menorah. The menorah became also the symbol of the new state. The state symbol was this menorah. And he said to Shprintzak, I want to create a new menorah and to bring it to Jerusalem and to bring it to the Israeli new parliament, to the Knesset, and to put it in the Knesset to show that we have our independence back after 2,000 years. And Shprintzak looked at him and he said, we are a very poor country. And he said, don't worry, I will take care of everything. And so this endeavor started. And first of all, what do you need to do? You need an artist. So he tried to find some nice artists in Britain, and he found Benno Elken, who was a British artist who was born in Germany. And he was even one of the founders of Bayern München football club. And he left Germany, of course, when the Nazis came to power. And he went to Britain. He did all kinds of nice sculptures and menorahs. And here is a sculpture in Greenwich that you can see. I don't remember the figure that he made, but this is a big statue that he made in Greenwich. In the middle, you can see a menorah that he made in the Westminster Abbey with all kinds of figures from the Old Testimony and the New Testimony, and that he made. And Edwin decided he will be, this guy, Benno Elkin, knows how to do menorahs, and with figures from the Bible and so on. He's the guy, exactly the guy that he needs. So the first phase he had, on his checklist, he has this is the first V that he can do, but now how we can finance the menorah. And the menorah cost in around 1950 that he started to do it. The estimate was about 20,000 pounds or even 25,000 pounds. And it wasn't a small sum of money. And how do you raise such amount of money? So he established the Menorah Fund Committee. And I can say that what I read in the archives of the Knesset and so on, I can see that the whole British Jewish community came into this endeavor and took it together and started giving money to shape this menorah in order to give it to the parliament, to the new Israeli parliament. And so he founded the Menorah Fund Committee, and he made the dinner party at the British House of Lords for potential donors. We have to remember that his father, Herbert Samuel, then became the leader of the Liberal Party in the House of Lords as being the Viscount of Mount Carmel. And he started distributing pamphlets, advertisings, and more. And he came with the idea of raising funds to the menorah in accordance with the menorah content. So he started selling a menorah content to all kinds of donors. They donated not just for a menorah, but for a special part in the menorah. So we have, for instance, the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen. I don't know if this organization is still active, but in those times it was, of British Jewish ex-servicemen. And they, for instance, took the money in order to the part called Bar Kokhba relief, as you can see it on the right. Marks and Spencer decided to pay for the apocalypse. Witzo Foundation financed the relief of Ruth and Rachel. We had James de Rothschild paid for Yochanan ben Zakkai in honor of his father, and so other many British Jews that gave the money. And when they finished raising the money and they brought the menorah already to Israel, there is a nice plaque. When you come to Jerusalem, you can see it on the back, which is said, the menorah is a work of Ben Elken. The idea of presenting the menorah was conceived by members of the Parliament of the United Kingdom and North Ireland in appreciation of the establishment of a democratic parliamentary government in the State of Israel. The committee organized the presentation, included members of both houses of parliament and representatives of the British people of diverse faiths. Viscount Samuel was the president. The Honorable Clement Davis was the leader of the Liberal Party. He was the chairman. We see Dr. Alec Learn, treasurer. He was one of the, I would say, one of the directors of Marks and Spencer, Mr. Gilbert McAllister, and so on. The gift was made possible by the generosity of the people of Britain and received strong support from the leading banks of the United Kingdom and large industrial concerns. Many small donations, too numerous to record here, were received from British citizens. So you can see it was really a big operation that the whole Jewish community in Britain came together in order to make it sure that there will be a menorah. And but there was some problems. There was some challenges that were in front of them. The ultra-religious parties that heard about the menorah and what is going on were very against, and they approached Pinchak and told him, look, first of all, we have in the Talmud say that a man may not, I will not read the whole thing, but it says that after the destruction of the temple, in the Talmud it said that we cannot do, or we cannot imitate objects that were in the temple, like a candlestick, for the like we had in the menorah, and in the Ten Commandments you have the saying you shall not make yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the water under the earth. And the religious Orthodox parties said, with all due respect, we cannot have this menorah in parliament because it is a non-kosher menorah. We cannot have a menorah with all of those statues and with all of and look like a menorah that used to be in the temple, and it was supposed to be the menorah that you can light it in Hanukkah and in other situations. And Pinchak was in a problem, so he approached the chief rabbi, Yitzhak Halevi Herzog, who, as you probably know, also came from Britain. He was born in Poland, but in a very young age, moved to Leeds. And later, he became the head rabbi of Belfast, of Dublin, and then of the whole Ireland. And later, he became, after Rabbi Cook died, passed away in Eretz Israel, he became the head Ashkenaz rabbi in Eretz Israel. And he also had a PhD from London University with literature and so on. So he was very, of course, the father of the president, later President Chaim Herzog, and his son is today the chairman of the Jewish Agency, his grandson. And Rabbi Yitzhak Halevi Herzog approaches Beno Elkin, the artist, and he say, look, first of all of those reliefs that you are making, please make them close to the base of the menorah as possible, so nobody can say it is like an idol. Second thing, he wanted to put holes for olive oil in order to light the menorah in Yom HaAtzmaut, in the Independence Day, in Hanukkah. Forget it, it will be a flat menorah. All of the branches of the menorah in the end will be flat, and there won't be any place to put oil, or everybody can think that it's a menorah that you can light. It's only going to be a menorah that you can see it, but not light it. And he wrote a big article saying why the menorah is kosher and should be in parliament, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. The religious party was against, the secular parties was also against because it was too religious. And Shpitzak told them, look, I'm very sorry, but we can't have the menorah inside the Knesset, but because we don't have place, then the building is very small and we don't have place, but we put it nearby. And when there will be a new building, we will bring it inside. And he also had this picture of where it will be and so on. You can see here the menorah arriving in Jerusalem in 1956, in the Independence Day of Israel. And in 66, when they opened the new building, that we know it is the building of the Knesset today, they approached Kaddish Luz, the new speaker, and he said he knew the whole problems with the religious parties and the not religious parties and so on, and he looked at his aides, and they told him, you know, there is a commitment to put the menorah back in the place of the parliament, and he said, well, I'm sorry, I will not deny the people of Jerusalem and the tourists that are coming to see the menorah, and instead of it putting it inside the Knesset behind closed doors and bars and so on. And from that day until today, I said the menorah is like Moshe Rabbeinu. Just look at the promised land, but can't enter into its gate. It's a very nice story. After half a year, came the American friends of the parliament and say, we heard that the British gave you a menorah. We want to give you a present. So Shpitzak said, what now? And they say, we are going to give you a duplicate of the Liberty Bell from Philadelphia. I think Shpitzak started with his heart problem that moment. And but we got this bell, and now we gave it, the Knesset gave it, and it's in the Independence Garden in Jerusalem, just opposite to the Inbal Hotel, if anybody knows where it is. But this came afterwards from the American friends after they saw the menorah. There was an assassination attempt on the Knesset in 1957 by a crazy guy that threw a hand grenade. And afterwards, it was very important because afterward we had established the Knesset Guard that you can see above, and also the Israeli Dignitary Protection Unit, which is very famous. The building was very small, and wasn't adequate to a parliament, but we didn't have the money to build a parliament until 22nd of July 1957, when Ben-Gurion approaches parliament. He said, I want to have an important message for parliament. And he came to the stand and say, I got a letter from James de Rothschild. James de Rothschild is the son of Edmund Rothschild. Again, sons and fathers, also a very important Jewish family. James de Rothschild lived in Wadison Manor. He inherited, and he learned in Cambridge and stayed in Britain, although he was born in France. And after he passed away, he left this letter that Ben-Gurion got and read it to the Knesset. And he said, my father, Edmund de Rothschild, began his colonization work in Israel 70 years ago. The work which began has been continued to this day, and so on. And he said the task set by PICA, the organization that the Rothschilds Foundation made, has been fulfilled. And the colonizing task of PICA having been fulfilled now, we are going to give the government all the lands of PICA. And what's more important, it says that we intend to provide a sum of 6 million Israeli pound. It was like a 1 million pound at those time for the construction of the new Knesset building in Jerusalem, which I understand it is proposed to set up, that the new Knesset building become a symbol in the eyes of all men of the permanence of the state of Israel. And he ends with the word, I'm confident that by the grace of the Almighty, the new chapter in the history of our people, which began with the creation of the state, will be glorious and enduring. And actually 1 year later, with the help of the Rothschild, of Jimmy the Rothschild, was also in the Jewish Legion, also a member of parliament from the Liberal Party. And he gave the money in his will, and you can see Sprinzak, the first speaker, and behind him the widow of James de Rothschild Dorothy, and opening the cornerstone of the Knesset 1 year later. And in 1966, we opened, in the help of James de Rothschild, the new building of the Knesset with a big ceremony. And perhaps a nice story that I will end with it, my presentation, and I will give time for Q&A. After the building was open, the Knesset wanted to, of course, to commemorate this donation. And the Baroness, the widow of James de Rothschild, brought 2 pictures of a painter that she liked very much, that was put in, and they are standing now in this commemoration stand, which is just outside the bureau of the Speaker of the Knesset, one of the most important places in the Israeli parliament. When we had George Bush came to speak, he came through this bureau, this part of the Knesset. When we had Gordon Brown, when we have Tony Blair came to speak in the front of the Knesset, they all passed here, the Queen of the Netherlands. So this is the most important part of the Knesset, and they put here the picture that she bought, and she bought it in 1970, and then they found out that this guy, that Harry Coburn, was a British artist. He was a British artist who later became known as also one of the most famous forger. He forged a lot of old master pictures because he felt that he is not appreciative and his pictures are not being put in very important museums and galleries and so on. So, and there was a big debate. You can see here Dorothy de Rothschild, the widow, and the speaker then Kaddish Luz. What do we do with those pictures? Do we left it there or do we take them down? But in the end, Baroness de Rothschild really liked the pictures that he made, and she liked the artist that actually was murdered in Rome by one of the people that actually bought the forgers that he did. And until today, those pictures are still in the parliament, and we left the old building, we left the old parliament house to the new one, and as you can see, and we are building there today the museum. And I hope that in 2 years' time, we will finish the construction and the museum, the presentation there, and we can have you all as our guests in Jerusalem. So thank you very much. And now, if there are any questions, I will be happy. Stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Moshe, for a very insightful and stimulating talk about the Knesset. I think it's safe to say that quite a few of us will have learned some some new and very interesting facts. I did like the story about the replica of the Liberty Bell, and you mentioned that it's probably the start of someone's heart issues. So that was very a nice insight. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions, and then we'll get on to some of the questions that our audience have submitted. With the Knesset, is there any one thing, or perhaps more, that the Knesset has that other parliamentary buildings across the world don't have? Obviously, there's the Liberty Bell and the menorah, but are there any other unique features about either the Knesset building or the structure of the Knesset, the political structure and the makeup of the Knesset that perhaps is unique? It may be that there isn't. It just dawned on me that, it'd be interesting to know if there is anything in particular.
Well, I think, first of all, our Jewish tradition is very present, because if you enter the Knesset, you will see in the plaza in front of the Knesset, we have 12 flags that representing the 12 tribes of Israel, standing in front of the three flags while representing the three different branches of government. Of course, we have the Chagall carpets, which is telling the whole story of the Jewish people. It's an amazing art piece. We have also a small archaeological garden that I don't think other parliaments had. We have the archaeological sighting from all of the different times from I would say before we started counting, from before DC. We have from the Muslim period, from the Roman period, and from the early Jewish period. It shows the history of Jerusalem. And I also think that if you go to the parliament, you can see how the connection to Jerusalem is also very strong in our parliament, but I'm not sure that other parliaments have such a strong connection to the place where they are, because the parliament opened in 1966, and it opened 1 year before the independence war, before Jerusalem was united. And if you look at the debate of the Knesset, on the back, you see a whole wall, the piece of there that actually shows like the Kotel HaMaravi, the Wailing Wall, is actually on the back of the Knesset. And when you enter, you can see all kinds of mosaics of in the Chagall Hall of taking about Johnson. This connection is also, I think, very unique to the Knesset.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting. And tell me, as unless I'm mistaken, the land that the Knesset is built on is technically owned by is it the Greek Orthodox Church? Or
yes,
that's still the case?
Yeah, there are some lands in Jerusalem that the Greek Orthodox Church bought a lot of years ago, but the Knesset made sure that we had actually required it back. So it's not anymore part of the Greek Orthodox Church, but we bought it a few years ago when it started, the whole problem of that.
Right. Okay. Thanks. So getting on to some of the questions that some members of the audience have asked. Let me just go through them. Yeah. So there's 120 members of the Knesset. Is there any particular significance in that number? Why 120 MKs?
Yeah, so there is, it's not just by case that we have 120 members. As I said in the beginning, the first Knesset, before it was a Knesset, it was supposed to be a constitutional assembly. But then Ben-Gurion decided that it's not the time for constitution, not the whole Jewish people, most of the Jewish people is not in Israel, we can decide, and so on. So they thought about a name, and the name was the Knesset. The Knesset, because it was called the Grand Knesset, was in the Jewish tradition, in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the prophets, after the destruction of the Second Temple, there was the Sanhedrin, the big Sanhedrin. And the big Sanhedrin called the Big Knesset. So this is why we got the name and the number. There were 120 representatives in the Sanhedrin, the big Sanhedrin, in the time of the Second Temple, that sat and decided about the fate of Israel in those times, and decided all kinds of law and interpreting the Talmud and so on. So this is why we have 120 members. This was a suggestion by the National Orthodox Party, what we call them the Mafdal. His name was Zerach Berhaftin. He was a member of Knesset, and he decided, and he proposed the name and the number.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a new one on me. And a couple of our audience participants have asked the same question, which is, what was the reason for Israel only having one chamber of parliament when so many other countries have two, such as, for example, the House, the House of Commons and the House of Lords here in the UK, the Senate and the House of Representatives in the United States? Is there any particular reason?
Well, first of all, I think that already in the beginning we were a very small country. Almost in 1949 there were about here like 600,000 Jews in the country and about 1,000 Arab residents. So they thought that 120 members and one chamber is enough. And also we had the tradition, we had the tradition of the Zionist Congress and Representative Assembly, and they try to continue to this history and to that manner. So they didn't thought any reason to change.
Oh, okay.
And it was also a very poor country. So if you are a very poor country, you don't have the money to build a new parliament house. You don't have the money to sustain your economy. You need to, there was a time with the preparation from Germany that came in order to help the economy of Israel that was ruined after the war and absorbing the mass refugees that came. It was a terrible situation. And so we barely had the money to have, pay one member, to pay the one house of the members of parliament. And even those members, they were not full-time members of parliament. They had also other works that they need also to take on in order to have the economic money that they need to support their families.
I think for many of us, or probably for most of us, we see Israel now as such a thriving country in terms of its democratic nature, its rich cultural fabric, and of course its economic standing in the world today. So it's easy for us to forget about its very humble and poor beginnings and its struggles back then. So thanks. What influence has the British Parliament had on the way that the Knesset is set up and run? And why are there so many coalition governments in Israel? A couple of questions in one there.
Yeah. What was the influence of the British government or the British Parliament on rounds?
Yeah, and why are there so many
coalitions? What do you mean by rounds? By how they are sitting?
Yeah.
So they are sitting actually like a menorah. The shape of the Knesset, they are sitting in the shape of the menorah, in front of the bench of the, so against the menorah, the famous symbol. This is how the order of the seats and the tables are, like a menorah heading the podium of the speaker.
Right. So
like a lot of coalition government, because our system, we don't have a system like in Britain that you have a representative system, but we have either a party system, which means that we have a lot of parties and nobody has a majority. So do you need to have a coalition? You don't have the biggest party in parliament today, I think, is the Likud with 35 seats, 120. You need to have a coalition government. You can't live to do it on. Ben-Gurion tried to change the system, but he didn't got the majority in order to change it because the rest of the parties, except Ben-Gurion's party, were against. So.
Interesting. I mean, also the design of the layout of the seating, like you said, everything in the Knesset really is rooted in the Jewish religion and our traditions, our symbols and culture. Quite fascinating. So we've had a question here. Were the first members of Knesset all Ashkenazi?
Well, a lot of them, yeah. The majority of the first members of Knesset came from Ashkenazi countries.
Yeah.
We had a party for the Yemenites Jews. They had their own party, and they had one member of the Knesset. We had a party of the Sephardi Jews from that came. They had like I think 4 or 5 members in the first parliament, and of course each party had had its own representative that came also from Sephardic background, but they were representing very few in every party. So I would say like from about 120, we had like around, I would say 20, not more than 20 representatives that came from Sephardic background. And by the way, we had, they had the restaurant of the Knesset in those time, and I saw the menu, and it was gefilte fish, and it was goulash, and it was compote. I don't know if you know if compote is also in English as a dessert. And it was, all of those things. And think about the Arab member of the Knesset having to eat in this restaurant. So although we had like 5, but yeah. So I know that there was a lot of, let's say the Sephardic members of Knesset used to eat at home or coming from food from where they came from, but they didn't stand the food in the restaurant. But this is telling something about the background of the
Fantastic. It's very interesting. So look, I think that's come to the end of the questions. We've just another quick question here, and I suspect the answer is yes, but not at the moment. Someone's typed in that they went on a Knesset tour in 1986, so that's sort of almost 30. Well, it's about 35 years ago. Is this weekly tour still available?
Yes, it is. We have tours every Sunday and Thursday. There are English tours and Hebrew tours, and you don't even have to register. Just come. And we are going now because of the coronavirus, and there is no visiting now. We can't visit the parliament because of the situation. We're going to do Zoom and all kinds of virtual tools. So from I think next week, we're going to launch it in our website of the Knesset website.
Fantastic.
So if everybody wants to.
Fantastic. Yeah. Great stuff. Okay. Well, if you send us details of that, launch of the new website, then we can certainly share it out to all of our members and supporters. Fantastic. So I think thank you very much. It's been very, very engaging and insightful. Everyone, thank you for joining us again. I'm seeing a lot of familiar names here. We're becoming like mishpacha. But thank you again for supporting us. Moshe, thank you for your time. Thank you, as I said, for a very engaging and interesting talk. And hold on, I've got one more question, and was there some disagreement over wording of the declaration?
Yes, there was. Ben Gurion was very secular, and there was a lot of disagreement about mentioning or not mentioning God and the Jewish tradition. And you cannot see the God of Israel something in the declaration, and there was a lot of debate about it. But in the end, Ben Gurion was, very strong, and he was the leader that everybody accepted, and he decided what will be. And the religious party didn't like this declaration. It was quite a problem for them.
So there you go. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining us. And Moshe, please God, we'll meet again in the future. Thank you. And thanks for everyone joining us. We have another webinar coming up on Tuesday, the 9th of February. It's a virtual tour, a virtual adventure. So you get to travel a bit and see Israel from the comfort of your your own homes. We're going to go virtually to Mount Elazar and have a different perspective on the story of Masada. So please join us for that. And then later in February, we're launching another series of webinars that will focus on inspirational Zionists. So you'll start to see details of that in our newsletters and on our social media. So thanks everyone for joining us. Have a good evening. Stay safe, stay well. And Moshe, thank you. Thank you very much.